When Marcus and Michael Thompson joined the Warriors Path Karate Dojo, they knew it wouldn't be easy being two of the only black students in the predominantly white school, but they never imagined what was waiting for them. From their first day, Jake Harrison and Connor Mills, two arrogant black belt bullies, made it their mission to break the 14-year-old twins. But when the harassment escalated and Jake sneered about monkeys learning human movements, they pushed too far. What the bullies didn't realize was that every night after their humiliation, the twins trained in secret with their father. The bullies believed they were systematically destroying two helpless yellow belts, but they couldn't have been more wrong. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The heavy bag swayed under Marcus Thompson's awkward strikes, each punch landing with a dull thud that betrayed his inexperience. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he struggled through the combination their instructor had demonstrated. Jab, cross, hook. His timing felt off, his stance uncertain. Beside him, his twin brother Michael practiced the same sequence, their movements mirroring each other with the unconscious synchronization that had marked them since birth. When Marcus shifted his weight, Michael did too. When Michael adjusted his guard, Marcus followed suit without thinking. "Yellow belts, over here," called Sensei Robert Mitchell from across the Warriors Path Karate Dojo. The 50-year-old instructor moved between students with practiced authority, his black belt worn soft from years of use. Time to work on basic stances. The dojo occupied a corner unit in Millbrook's Eastgate shopping plaza, its mirrored walls reflecting the late afternoon sun streaming through tall windows. 20 students filled the space, most wearing white gis with colored belts marking their progress. The Thompson twins stood out, not just as two of only 3 black students in the school, but as the newest members, having earned their yellow belts just 2 weeks ago after 3 months of white belt training. Marcus and Michael moved to the designated area, their identical movements drawing subtle stares from other students. At 14, they shared the same height, the same athletic build from playing basketball, and the same determined expression that masked their nervousness in this predominantly white space. "Horse stance. Hold for 1 minute," Sensei Mitchell instructed. The twins dropped into position, thighs burning as they maintained the wide-legged squat. Around them, more experienced students moved through advanced forms with fluid precision that highlighted just how new the brothers were to martial arts. "Look at the twins," Jake Harrison's voice carried from across the room where he practiced with other black belts. The 17-year-old's tone held amusement that made Marcus's shoulders tense, like watching 2 monkeys trying to figure out human movements. Connor Mills snickered beside him. "Maybe they'll learn faster if we throw them some bananas." The words hit Marcus like physical blows. His stance wavered, and immediately Michael's did too, their connection betraying his brother's reaction. Several other students had heard the comments, their eyes darting between the twins and the black belts with uncomfortable awareness. Sensei Mitchell, standing less than 10 feet away, continued his instruction as if nothing had happened. "Keep those backs straight, yellow belts. Power comes from proper foundation." Michael's jaw clenched, his hands forming fists at his sides. Marcus felt his brother's anger as if it were his own, their twin bond amplifying every emotion. When one of them hurt, both did. When one felt humiliated, the shame doubled. "Time for sparring drills," Sensei Mitchell announced, clapping his hands twice. "Partner up with someone near your skill level." Marcus wiped his sweaty palms on his GI pants and looked around for another yellow belt. But Jake Harrison was already approaching them with that same predatory smile. "Fresh meat," Jake said, his voice pitched for his friend's amusement. "Let's see what these two can actually do." "We should partner with other yellow belts," Michael said quietly, his usual analytical approach trying to find a way out. "Don't worry," Connor Mills joined them, his black belt a stark contrast to their yellow ones. "We'll teach you some real techniques, unless you'd rather go back to whatever you learned on the streets." The casual racism in his tone made Marcus's vision blur with anger. He started to step forward, but Michael's hand caught his arm, their twin awareness preventing a confrontation that would only make things worse. "Bow to your partner," Sensei Mitchell instructed from across the room. Marcus found himself facing Connor, while Jake positioned himself opposite Michael. The twins exchanged a quick glance, a wordless communication that had served them since childhood. Stay calm. Stick together. Survive this. "Light contact only," Sensei Mitchell called out. "This is about technique, not power." The sparring began, and immediately Marcus knew they were in trouble. Connor's first kick, allegedly pulled at the last second, caught him solidly in the ribs with enough force to drive the air from his lungs. The impact sent him stumbling backward, his inexperienced footwork making recovery impossible. "Oops," Connor said with theatrical concern. "Guess these yellow belts are even softer than they look." On the adjacent mat, Michael was experiencing the same treatment. Jake's light contact punches were landing with precision that spoke of deliberate targeting. When Michael tried to counter with one of the basic combinations they'd learned, Jake easily deflected it and responded with a sweep that sent Michael crashing to the mat. "Stay down there," Jake said, not offering to help. "That's where you belong anyway." Michael pushed himself up, embarrassment and fury warring in his expression. Marcus felt every bit of his brother's humiliation, their connection making the abuse doubly painful. The sparring continued for 10 more brutal minutes. Both twins accumulated bruises while Jake and Connor maintained their facade of instruction, their comments growing bolder as Sensei Mitchell remained conspicuously focused on other students. "Maybe your daddy should have signed you up for basketball instead," Connor panted after landing another accidental elbow to Marcus's shoulder. "Stick to what your people are good at." "We're not quitting," Marcus said through gritted teeth, tasting blood from a split lip. "We'll see about that," Jake replied, helping Michael up from another hard takedown with unnecessary roughness. "This dojo has standards." As the session finally ended, the twins gathered their gear in pained silence. Both were limping slightly, their yellow belts a stark reminder of how outmatched they'd been. Around them, other students avoided eye contact, the discomfort in the room palpable. "Good work today," Sensei Mitchell announced to the class. "Remember, martial arts builds character through discipline and respect." The irony wasn't lost on either twin. As they headed for the exit, Marcus noticed Jake and Connor talking quietly near the equipment rack, their voices just audible enough to catch fragments. "Won't last another month? Daddy's probably in prison anyway. Should stick to their own kind of places." Michael's step faltered, and Marcus felt his brother's control slip. Before either could react, their father's pickup truck pulled into the parking lot, the familiar rumble of the diesel engine announcing David Thompson's arrival. Outside, they tried to arrange their faces into neutral expressions, but their identical injuries told a story that would be hard to explain. David Thompson climbed out of his truck, his construction-hardened frame moving with the efficiency of a man who'd served 8 years in the Army before starting his family. His dark eyes immediately catalogued his son's disheveled appearance, the careful way they moved, the forced casualness of their postures. "How was class?" he asked, his voice carrying the authority that had commanded respect from subordinates and co-workers for 2 decades. "Fine," both boys replied in perfect unison, their twin synchronization intact, even in deception. David studied them for a long moment, his gaze lingering on Marcus's split lip and Michael's reddened forearms. "Learn anything useful?" "Yeah," Marcus said, sharing a look with his brother that carried volumes of unspoken communication. "We learned a lot." 3 weeks passed, and the pattern became as predictable as it was painful. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, the twins would arrive at the dojo with renewed determination, only to find themselves systematically broken down by Jake Harrison and Connor Mills. Partner rotation today, Sensei Mitchell announced during their 6th week of classes. Advanced students will help beginners with sparring fundamentals. Marcus felt his stomach drop as Jake's eyes locked onto his across the room. The predatory smile was becoming as familiar as his own reflection. "Looks like Christmas came early," Connor murmured to Jake, loud enough for several students to hear. "Fresh targets." The sparring session began with what appeared to be legitimate instruction. Jake demonstrated a basic blocking technique to Michael, his movements slow and controlled for the benefit of watching parents in the observation area. "See how I position my arm?" Jake said, his voice carrying the patient tone of a dedicated instructor. "Try it." Michael mimicked the movement, and Jake nodded approvingly. Then, without warning, his follow-up strike slipped past Michael's guard and caught him in the solar plexus. Michael doubled over, gasping. "You dropped your guard," Jake said with false concern. "In a real fight, that hesitation gets you hurt." Marcus started forward, but Connor intercepted him with a firm grip on his shoulder. "Your brother needs to learn for himself, unless you think he's too weak to handle real training." The challenge hung in the air. Marcus knew refusing would mean abandoning Michael, but accepting meant enduring Connor's particular brand of instruction. "I can handle whatever you've got," Marcus said, his voice steadier than he felt. Connor's grin widened. "Good. Let's work on combinations." What followed was 20 minutes of systematic abuse disguised as training. Connor's strikes consistently landed harder than necessary, his corrections accompanied by shoves and trips that sent Marcus sprawling across the mat. "You're too aggressive," Connor said, after dropping Marcus with a leg sweep. "Your people always think force solves everything, but martial arts is about control." The racial undertone was subtle enough to maintain plausible deniability while cutting deep enough to draw blood. Marcus felt his anger building, the familiar fire that Michael always helped him control. But his brother was across the mat, dealing with his own torment. Meanwhile, Michael struggled with Jake's increasingly violent demonstrations. Every technique seemed to result in Michael on his back, winded and disoriented. "Maybe you should consider a different hobby," Jake suggested, as he helped Michael up from another hard throw. "Something more natural for you. Basketball, maybe? Running?" "I'm not quitting," Michael said, his quiet determination earning him another punishing drill. From his position near the front desk, Sensei Mitchell observed the sessions with apparent satisfaction. When concerned parents asked about the intensity of training, he spoke about building character through adversity. "Traditional martial arts aren't for everyone," he explained to one mother whose son had requested to switch partners. "We maintain high standards here." After class, the twins sat in their father's truck, ice packs pressed against various injuries. The silence stretched between them, filled with shared frustration and growing desperation. "Dad's going to notice eventually," Michael said finally, adjusting the ice on his bruised ribs. "We tell him we're learning," Marcus replied. "Which is true." "Learning what? That we don't belong here?" Marcus turned to study his brother's profile. Despite being twins, their reactions to adversity had always differed. Marcus burned hot and fast, while Michael internalized everything until it consumed him from within. "We belong anywhere we want to be," Marcus said firmly. "They don't get to decide that for us. Tell that to my ribs." 2 days later, David Thompson made an unexpected decision. Instead of dropping the boys off at the dojo entrance, he parked and walked them inside, claiming he wanted to observe a class. The twins exchanged nervous glances as their father settled into the small seating area reserved for parents. David's presence immediately altered the atmosphere. His military bearing and obvious protectiveness creating a buffer the boys hadn't experienced in weeks. Mr. Thompson, Sensei Mitchell approached with professional courtesy. Nice to see a parent taking interest in their children's training. Always interested in my boy's education, David replied, his tone neutral but his eyes sharp as they surveyed the room. That evening's class proceeded differently. Jake and Connor maintained their roles as senior students, but their comments became more subtle, their physical contact more carefully controlled. The racial undertones remained, but delivered with surgical precision designed to avoid detection by adult observers. Good effort today, Jake told Michael after a particularly brutal grappling session. You're really improving. Your father must be proud of how well you're adapting to our environment. The word adapting carried unmistakable meaning, but delivered with such apparent sincerity that David, watching from across the room, saw nothing but encouragement. Connor employed similar tactics with Marcus, offering praise laced with condescension. You're getting better at taking direction. It's good to see you learning your place in the hierarchy. After class, David spoke briefly with Sensei Mitchell about the boys' progress. They're dedicated students, the instructor said. Natural athleticism, but they need to understand that martial arts is about more than physical ability. It's about fitting into a structured environment. They're good kids, David replied. Been raised to respect authority and work hard. I can see that. With the right guidance, they'll find their proper level here. The phrase proper level resonated with subtle implications that sailed past David's awareness, but struck both twins like physical blows. During the drive home, David expressed satisfaction with what he'd observed. Looks like you boys are getting good training in there. That Mitchell fellow runs a tight ship. Yes, sir, both boys replied, their synchronized response masking the bitter irony of their father's approval. Those older students seem helpful too. Good to see experienced kids taking newcomers under their wing. Marcus stared out the passenger window, watching familiar streets blur past. His father's interpretation of events felt like living in an alternate reality, one where mentorship replaced torment, where guidance masked systematic humiliation. They're teaching us a lot, Michael said quietly from the back seat, and technically it was true. They were learning about institutional racism, about how authority figures could enable abuse through willful blindness, about how victims could be isolated even in crowded rooms. That's what I like to hear, David said, pulling into their driveway. Martial arts builds character, teaches you to handle whatever life throws at you. As they gathered their gear bags, Marcus caught his brother's eye in the truck's dome light. The same thought passed between them without words. They were handling what life threw at them, but not in the way their father imagined. That night, lying in their shared bedroom, the twins finally spoke openly about their situation. It's not getting better, Michael whispered in the darkness. I know. What if we told Dad the truth? Marcus considered this. Their father had always taught them to fight their own battles, to never run from challenges, to earn respect through perseverance. How could they explain that the system itself was rigged against them? He wouldn't believe it, Marcus said finally. He saw Mitchell tonight, saw Jake and Connor. Everything looked normal to him. Because they made it look normal. Exactly. And if we complain, we look like quitters, like we can't handle real training. Michael was quiet for so long that Marcus thought he'd fallen asleep. Then his brother's voice came through the darkness, carrying a resolve that matched Marcus's own burning determination. Then we get better, strong enough that they can't hurt us anymore. How? They're black belts. We just got our yellow belts. I don't know yet, Michael admitted, but there has to be a way. Outside their window, the suburban street lay peaceful under streetlights, a picture of the American dream their parents had worked so hard to achieve. Inside the room, two 14-year-old boys planned their survival in a war their father couldn't see and their instructors refused to acknowledge. The 8th week of classes began like all the others, with Marcus and Michael gathering their gear while their father finished his coffee in the kitchen. David had been working overtime on a commercial project, his exhaustion evident in the dark circles beneath his eyes. "You boys need a ride home tonight?" he asked, checking his watch. "I might be able to swing by after my meeting with the electrical contractor." "We can walk," Marcus said quickly. The last thing they needed was their father witnessing another session of disguised abuse. "It's getting dark earlier now," David pointed out. "I don't mind picking you up." "Really, Dad, we're fine," Michael added. "The fresh air helps us cool down after training." David studied them for a moment, then nodded. "All right, but call if you change your minds." At the dojo, the evening began with basic forms practice. The twins had been working on their techniques at home, using online videos to supplement their limited instruction, and their improvement was noticeable. "Time for partner drills," Sensei Mitchell announced. "Today we're working on defensive techniques against multiple attackers." The exercise was designed for advanced students, but somehow the twins found themselves selected as demonstration partners. Jake and Connor volunteered to show proper technique, their eagerness raising red flags that went unnoticed by their instructor. "The key is staying mobile," Jake explained to the watching class as he and Connor circled the twins. "When outnumbered, you can't plant your feet and trade punches." What followed was a master class in sanctioned violence. Under the guise of demonstrating defensive principles, Jake and Connor subjected the twins to a sustained assault that left them both bloodied and disoriented. "See how they're trying to back up?" Connor called out as he swept Michael's legs, sending him crashing to the mat. "That's exactly what not to do. Natural instincts don't work in real martial arts." Marcus tried to help his brother up, but Jake intercepted him with a knee strike that doubled him over. "Focus on your own survival first," Jake instructed the class while grinding Marcus's face into the mat. "Can't help your partner if you're on the ground where you belong." The demonstration continued for 15 brutal minutes. Every time one twin tried to recover, the other was targeted, keeping both off balance and unable to mount any effective defense. "Some people just aren't cut out for this level of training," Jake added, helping Michael up with a grip that left finger-shaped bruises on his arm. As class ended, the twins gathered their gear with practiced stoicism. Their bodies ached, their pride was shattered, but they'd survived another session. Outside the dojo, they were surprised to see their father's pickup truck pulling into the parking lot. David's contractor meeting had ended early, and he'd decided to surprise them with a ride home. Through the large front windows, he could see Jake and Connor laughing with other students near the equipment rack. Their voices carried clearly through the glass. "Did you see how fast they went down?" Connor was saying. "Like they've never been in a real fight before." "Probably learned everything they know on the streets," Jake replied. "No discipline, no technique, just wild swinging like animals." David's blood turned to ice as the racial implications hit him. Then his sons emerged from the building. Even in the parking lot's dim lighting, the extent of their injuries was impossible to miss. Marcus's lip was split and swollen, his GI torn at the shoulder. Michael moved with the careful gait of someone nursing bruised ribs. David's military training kicked in immediately. He'd seen enough injured soldiers to recognize systematic abuse. "Get in the truck," he said quietly, his voice carrying controlled fury. At home, under the harsh kitchen lights, the full extent of their injuries became undeniable. "How long?" he asked. "Dad, it's not," Marcus began. "How long?" David repeated, his command voice cutting through deflection. "Since the beginning," Michael said quietly. "Since our first day." The story poured out, 8 weeks of systematic brutalization, while David praised their character building. "The instructor saw all this?" he asked. "He was right there," Marcus said. "But when you visited, they made everything look normal." David paced to the window, his reflection showing a man wrestling with decisions that would define his family's future. "What do we do?" Michael asked. David was quiet for a moment, his mind working through options with military precision. Then he made his decision. "We give them one chance to make this right. I'll speak to Mitchell tomorrow." "What if he doesn't listen?" Marcus asked. David's smile held no warmth. "Then we handle it ourselves." That night, David retrieved a heavy bag and focus mitts from his garage. If the system wouldn't protect his sons, he'd give them the tools to protect themselves. The next evening, David walked into the dojo with purposeful stride. Sensei Mitchell looked up from the front desk with professional courtesy that quickly shifted to concern. "Mr. Thompson, what can I do for you? We need to talk about my sons and what's been happening in your classes." Mitchell's face remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. "Of course. Let's step into my office." As they walked toward the back, Jake and Connor looked up from their warm-ups, their expressions shifting from arrogance to concern. Everything was about to change. David followed Sensei Mitchell into the cramped office behind the front desk, his eyes taking in the framed certificates, tournament photos, and motivational posters that decorated the walls. Everything about the space projected authority and tradition, exactly the kind of environment that could hide systematic abuse behind a veneer of respectability. "Please, have a seat," Mitchell said, settling behind his desk with the casual confidence of a man who'd handled difficult parents before. "What seems to be the concern?" David remained standing, his construction-hardened frame filling the small space with barely contained tension. "My sons have been getting beaten up in your classes for 2 months. Systematically harassed, targeted with racial comments, and physically abused by your black belt students." Mitchell's expression shifted to practiced concern. "Mr. Thompson, I understand training can be intense, especially for newer students. But what you're describing doesn't sound like the program we run here. Jake Harrison and Connor Mills have been using my boys as punching bags," David continued, his voice steady but dangerous. "Under your supervision, in front of other students, and you've done nothing to stop it." "Those are serious allegations," Mitchell replied, leaning back in his chair. "Jake and Connor are exemplary students from respected families. They've been training here for years." The emphasis on respected families wasn't lost on David. "Are you saying my sons are lying?" "I'm saying young people sometimes misinterpret firm instruction as harassment. Martial arts training can be challenging, and not everyone is suited for it." David's hands clenched into fists. "Last night I heard those boys calling my sons animals, making jokes about street fighting. Are you going to tell me that's firm instruction?" Mitchell's composure cracked slightly. "I wasn't aware of any inappropriate language. If something was said, you were 10 feet away when it happened. Don't insult my intelligence." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken threats and failed responsibilities. Mitchell cleared his throat and shuffled some papers on his desk. "Perhaps we can find a solution that works for everyone," he said finally. "The Harrison and Mills families have been significant supporters of this dojo. Their contributions help keep our doors open and provide scholarships for other students. So you're protecting them because they pay you. I'm maintaining a delicate balance that benefits the entire school community. Your sons are capable young men, but they might be happier in a different environment, something more suited to their background." David stepped closer to the desk, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried more menace than any shout. "Their background? You mean being black?" "I mean being new to structured training environments. Some students adapt better to traditional discipline than others." "Traditional discipline? Is that what you call 2 black belts beating up yellow belts while you watch?" Mitchell stood up, matching David's aggressive posture. "Mr. Thompson, I've been running this dojo for 15 years. I know the difference between training and abuse. If your sons are struggling with the intensity of our program, they're not struggling. They're being targeted. Then perhaps this isn't the right school for them." The words hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. David studied Mitchell's face, seeing the calculation behind the man's eyes. This wasn't ignorance or oversight. It was willful complicity dressed up as business necessity. "So that's your solution? My sons leave quietly, and you continue taking money from racist parents to let their kids terrorize anyone who doesn't fit their idea of what belongs here?" "I'm trying to find a practical resolution to a difficult situation." David turned toward the door, then paused. "You have until tomorrow night to fix this. Transfer those boys to different classes. Discipline them publicly. Make it clear that harassment stops now, whatever it takes. And if I don't," David's smile was arctic, "then I handle it my way." Outside the office, the evening class was beginning. Through the doorway, David could see his sons warming up with other students, their movements still careful from the previous night's injuries. Jake and Connor were across the room, their body language relaxed and confident. Meanwhile, inside the office, Mitchell sat back down heavily, his mind racing through the implications of David's ultimatum. The Harrison and Mills families contributed over 30% of the dojo's revenue through monthly fees, private lessons, and equipment purchases. Losing them would mean cutting programs, laying off staff, possibly closing entirely. But David Thompson had the look of a man who meant exactly what he said. Back at the Thompson house, the twins sat at the kitchen table working on homework while their father was at the dojo. Both boys kept glancing at the clock, anxiety building as the minutes ticked by. "What do you think he's going to say?" Michael asked, his pencil tapping nervously against his math textbook. "Whatever needs saying," Marcus replied, but his own tension was evident in the way he gripped his pen. "What if it makes things worse?" Marcus looked up from his history assignment. "How could they get worse? They're already trying to break us. They could actually break us, or get us kicked out. Maybe that wouldn't be the worst thing." Michael stared at his brother. Despite their twin connection, sometimes Marcus's willingness to burn bridges surprised him. "You want to quit? I want to be somewhere we're not treated like garbage every day, but I also want to prove we belong wherever we choose to be. Those two things might not be compatible. Then we make them compatible." The front door opened, and both boys looked up as their father entered. David's expression was grim, his military bearing more pronounced than usual. "How did it go?" Marcus asked. David hung his keys on the hook by the door and joined them at the table. "Mitchell's more concerned about his donors than his students. He basically admitted he knows what's happening and doesn't plan to stop it." "So what now?" Michael asked. David was quiet for a moment, studying his sons' faces. These boys had inherited his stubborn streak and their mother's moral compass. They wouldn't back down from a fight, especially one that involved fundamental questions of dignity and respect. Now we prepare for the possibility that talking won't solve this problem. "What does that mean?" Marcus asked, though something in his father's tone suggested he already knew. "It means if the system won't protect you, I'll teach you to protect yourselves." "Really protect yourselves?" Michael felt a chill of anticipation mixed with fear. "Are you talking about fighting?" "I'm talking about survival. About making sure nobody ever puts their hands on you again without consequences." That night, David cleared space in the garage and hung the heavy bag he'd retrieved from storage. The twins watched as their father transformed the mundane workshop into something that looked more like a training facility. "Your mother doesn't need to know about this yet," David said, as he tested the bag's stability. "This stays between us until we see how things play out at the dojo." "What exactly are you going to teach us?" Marcus asked. David's smile was sharp with promise. "Everything I learned in 8 years of military combat training. Everything they don't teach in pretty dojos with pretty rules." "Is that legal?" Michael asked. Self-defense is always legal. And after what I saw tonight, what's been done to you boys, anything you do to protect yourselves will be justified." The twins exchanged a look that carried volumes of silent communication. Their father was offering them something the dojo never had: real power, real protection, real respect. "When do we start?" Marcus asked. "Right now," David replied, pulling on a pair of focus mitts. "Because tomorrow night, we find out if Mitchell keeps his word. And if he doesn't." He let the sentence hang unfinished, but the implication was clear. The time for talking was almost over. The time for action was beginning. The garage felt different at 10 o'clock that night, transformed from a mundane workspace into something that hummed with purpose and possibility. David had moved his truck outside and rearranged tools and equipment to create an open training area. The heavy bag hung from a reinforced beam, swaying slightly in the cool evening air. "First lesson," David said, wrapping his hands with cloth strips. "Everything you've learned at that dojo is designed to make you predictable. Traditional stances, traditional combinations, traditional responses. In a real fight, predictable gets you hurt." Marcus and Michael stood side by side, still wearing their school clothes, unsure of what to expect from their father's version of martial arts instruction. "Dad, we're not trying to hurt anyone," Michael said carefully. "We just want them to leave us alone." David's laugh was humorless. "Son, they've been hurting you for 2 months. This isn't about starting fights. It's about ending them quickly when they start with you." He demonstrated a basic stance that looked nothing like what they'd learned at the dojo. Lower, more mobile, hands positioned for striking rather than blocking. In the Army, we didn't have time for fancy forms or elaborate techniques. We learned to neutralize threats efficiently and move on. That's what I'm going to teach you. For the next hour, David ran them through drills that emphasized speed, aggression, and targeting vulnerable areas. No ritualized sparring, no pulled punches, no concern for tournament rules. "Hit the solar plexus, the throat, the knees," he instructed, holding focus mitts for Marcus to strike. "Don't worry about looking pretty. Worry about making sure the other guy can't continue." The twins adapted quickly, their natural athleticism and months of basic training providing a foundation that David built upon with military precision. More importantly, they began to understand the mental shift their father was teaching, from defensive victims to aggressive defenders. "The next time that Connor kid grabs you," David told Marcus, "you don't try to escape the grip. You use it to get closer and hit him where it counts." "What if we get in trouble?" Michael asked. "For defending yourselves against documented bullies? Let them try to explain that to your mother." Meanwhile, across town, the Harrison family sat around their dining room table discussing their son's martial arts progress. Richard Harrison, a successful insurance executive, took pride in Jake's advancement through the belt ranks and his position as one of the dojo's senior students. "Sensei Mitchell mentioned there might be some issues with newer students," Richard said, cutting into his steak. "Something about cultural differences affecting training dynamics." Jake nodded, keeping his expression neutral. "There are these twin kids who started a few months ago. They're having trouble adapting to the discipline." "What kind of trouble?" his mother asked. "They get frustrated easily. Sometimes they don't show proper respect to senior students. Mitchell's been working with them, but they might not be a good fit for traditional martial arts." Richard frowned. "That's unfortunate, but not everyone is suited for the kind of character building that real martial arts provides." "Exactly," Jake agreed. "Some people just aren't cut out for it." The conversation continued in this vein, with Jake carefully crafting a narrative that positioned himself and Connor as patient mentors dealing with difficult students. His parents listened with the satisfaction of people whose worldview was being confirmed. Some families understood discipline and respect, while others simply didn't. Back in the Thompson garage, the training session was intensifying. David had moved beyond basic strikes to combination attacks and defensive counters. "They're going to try to use their size and belt rank to intimidate you," he said, circling the twins with predatory focus. "But size means nothing if you're faster and more aggressive than they expect." He demonstrated a sequence that involved closing distance, striking multiple targets, and creating space for follow-up attacks. The movements were brutal in their efficiency, designed to overwhelm rather than out-technique an opponent. "This isn't about being better martial artists than they are," David explained. "It's about being better fighters. There's a difference." Marcus threw a combination that landed solidly on the focus mitts, the impact resonating through the garage. For the first time in months, he felt powerful rather than helpless. "That's it," David encouraged. "Now add the knee strike we practiced. Don't give them time to recover." Michael's progress was equally dramatic. His analytical nature helped him understand the tactical principles behind each technique, while his suppressed anger provided the emotional fuel to execute them with conviction. "Remember," David said as they finished for the night, "this training stays between us. At the dojo, you act the same as always. Don't let them know what you're learning here." "How long do we keep pretending?" Marcus asked. David's smile was sharp with anticipation. "Until the right moment presents itself. And trust me, it will." The next evening at the dojo, the twins returned to their usual routine of enduring harassment and systematic abuse. But something fundamental had changed in their bearing. They still took the hits, still absorbed the insults, but their reactions were different. More controlled, more calculating. "You're getting better at taking punishment," Connor observed after a particularly brutal sparring session. "Maybe you're finally learning your place here." Marcus met his eyes steadily. "We're learning a lot." Jake noticed the change too. "They seem less reactive tonight," he mentioned to Connor during a water break. "Usually they get more frustrated as the session goes on." "Maybe they're finally giving up," Connor replied. "About time." But giving up was the furthest thing from the twins' minds. As they endured another night of disguised torture, they were mentally cataloging their tormentors' fighting styles, identifying weaknesses, planning responses they couldn't yet execute. Sensei Mitchell, meanwhile, was growing increasingly uncomfortable with the situation. David Thompson's ultimatum weighed heavily on his mind, but the financial realities of running the dojo made meaningful change seem impossible. After class, he pulled Jake and Connor aside. "I need you boys to be extra careful with the Thompson twins," he said quietly. "Their father made some complaints, and I don't want any unnecessary attention on our training methods." "What kind of complaints?" Jake asked. "The usual parent concerns about intensity." "Nothing serious, but we need to be smart about how we handle things." Connor's eyes narrowed. "Are you saying we should go easy on them?" "I'm saying we need to be more subtle. Make sure everything looks like legitimate training if anyone's watching." The two teenagers exchanged a look that spoke volumes. They understood the game being played. Maintain the abuse, but improve the optics. It was a challenge they were eager to accept. As the twins gathered their gear after class, they could feel the shift in atmosphere. Their tormentors were adapting, becoming more careful, but no less committed to their campaign of harassment. "They're going to be more careful now," Michael observed during the walk home. "Good," Marcus replied. "Careful means predictable. And predictable means we can prepare for exactly what they'll do." That night's training session in the garage focused on countering specific techniques they'd observed Jake and Connor using. David's military experience provided insights into reading opponents and exploiting their tactical assumptions. "They expect you to fight like yellow belts," he said, holding a focus mitt while Marcus practiced close-range combinations. "When the time comes, you'll fight like soldiers." The transformation was remarkable. In just 2 training sessions, The twins had begun to shed their victim mentality and embrace something far more dangerous, the mindset of predators waiting for their moment to strike. 4 weeks of secret training had transformed the Thompson garage into a battlefield laboratory. The heavy bag bore the marks of countless combinations, and the concrete floor showed scuff marks where the twins had practiced footwork drills until muscle memory replaced conscious thought. "Tournament registration closes tomorrow," David announced, setting down the local martial arts magazine that featured advertisements for the upcoming Tri-County Open. "You boys ready to make a decision?" Marcus wiped sweat from his forehead, his breathing steady despite the intense training session they'd just completed. A month of his father's instruction had added muscle definition to his frame and confidence to his movements. "We're ready," he said without hesitation. Michael was quieter, studying the tournament flyer with analytical intensity. "Dad, this says they have divisions for different belt levels. We'd be competing against other yellow belts." "Not if you enter the open division," David replied, his tone carrying implications that made both boys look up sharply. "The open division is for anyone, regardless of rank," Marcus said slowly, understanding dawning in his voice. "Including black belts." "Including Jake and Connor," Michael added. David nodded. "The question is whether you're ready to show everyone what you've really learned. Not just defend yourselves, but dominate opponents who think they're superior to you." The garage fell silent, except for the gentle creaking of the heavy bag's chain. This was the moment all their training had been building toward. Not just physical preparation, but a fundamental choice about who they wanted to be. "If we do this," Michael said carefully, "there's no going back. Win or lose, everyone will know we're not the same kids who started at that dojo." "Are you the same kids?" David asked. Marcus flexed his hands, remembering the helpless frustration of those early weeks when every technique failed and every session ended in humiliation. "No, we're not." "But what if we lose?" Michael pressed. "What if 4 weeks of training isn't enough to beat kids who've been doing this for years?" David's smile was fierce with paternal pride. "Son, they've been doing karate for years. You've been learning to fight. There's a difference." Later that night, the twins found themselves alone in their shared bedroom, wrestling with the moral complexity of their situation. "This feels wrong," Michael said quietly. "All the lying, the secret training, the planning for revenge. What feels wrong is letting them think they can treat us however they want," Marcus replied. "What feels wrong is a system that protects bullies because their parents write checks. But if we hurt them at the tournament, if we defend ourselves at the tournament, there's a difference." Michael was quiet for a moment. "Is there?" "Dad's not teaching us self-defense, Marcus. He's teaching us to be weapons. Maybe that's what we need to be. Or maybe that makes us just like them." The conversation revealed the fundamental tension that had been building throughout their month of secret preparation. They'd gained the physical skills to match their tormentors, but the moral questions remained unresolved. Meanwhile, in his own bedroom, David stared at the ceiling and grappled with his own ethical dilemmas. He'd spent his adult life teaching his sons about honor, respect, and working within systems to solve problems. Now he was training them to circumvent those same systems through violence. But the memory of his boys' injuries, the racist comments overheard through dojo windows, the institutional indifference of Sensei Mitchell, all of it justified what he was doing, didn't it? The final decision was made during their conversation the following evening in the garage. "The tournament is in 3 weeks," David said, looking at each of his sons in turn. "If we're going to do this, I need to register you tomorrow. After that, there's no backing out." "What exactly are we signing up for?" Michael asked. "Just the tournament or everything that comes after?" David's expression grew serious. "Son, the moment you step into that ring and show what you can really do, everything changes. The dojo, the other students, probably the community. You'll be making a statement that can't be taken back. Good, Marcus said firmly. I'm tired of being quiet about who we are and what we can do. Michael looked at his brother, seeing the determination that had carried them through months of systematic abuse. Despite his reservations, he knew Marcus was right. They'd tried being victims, tried working within the system, tried enduring in hopes that things would improve naturally. Nothing had worked except becoming strong enough to demand respect. Okay, Michael said finally. Let's do it. David nodded, pride and apprehension warring in his expression. Then tomorrow I register my sons for the Open Division of the Tri-County Open, and we spend the next 3 weeks making sure you're ready for whatever comes next. As they began their evening training session, all 3 Thompson men understood they'd crossed a line from which there would be no retreat. The tournament would be more than a competition. It would be a reckoning. The Millbrook Community Center buzzed with nervous energy as competitors, families, and spectators filled the converted gymnasium for the Tri-County Open. Banners from various dojos hung from the rafters, and multiple rings had been set up across the polished floor. The Thompson twins sat in folding chairs near the registration table, their yellow belts stark against the sea of higher-ranked competitors warming up around them. Thompson, Marcus, and Michael, the tournament coordinator called out, checking his clipboard. You boys sure you want the Open Division? We've got a nice yellow belt bracket that might be more appropriate. We're sure, Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. David stood behind his sons, watching Jake Harrison and Connor Mills stretch with their teammates from Warriors Path Dojo. Both teenagers wore their black belts with casual arrogance, their conversation peppered with laughter as they glanced toward the Thompson family. Look who decided to show up, Connor said, loud enough to carry across the warm-up area. This should be entertaining. Jake nodded toward the twins. I almost feel bad for them. Almost. Sensei Mitchell approached the group, his expression mixing surprise with barely concealed annoyance. Mr. Thompson, I wasn't aware your sons were competing today. Lots of things you're not aware of, David replied evenly. Ring 3, Open Sparring Division, the announcer called. First match, Connor Mills versus Michael Thompson. A hush fell over the Warriors Path Dojo section as the unlikely pairing was announced. Several parents exchanged knowing looks, anticipating a quick demonstration of why belt rankings existed. Michael walked to the center of Ring 3, his yellow belt drawing stares and whispered comments from the crowd. Connor followed with the confident swagger of someone expecting an easy victory. Bow to your opponent, the referee instructed. Michael's bow was respectful, but not subservient. Connor's was perfunctory, almost mocking. Fighters ready? Begin! Connor immediately launched into an aggressive combination, expecting to overwhelm his opponent with superior technique and experience. His first kick whistled through empty air as Michael sidestepped with fluid precision that shouldn't have been possible for a yellow belt. The counterattack came faster than anyone expected. Michael closed distance with explosive speed, landing a sharp punch to Connor's solar plexus that doubled him over. Before Connor could recover, Michael followed with a knee strike that caught him in the ribs, driving the air from his lungs. Point, Thompson, the referee called. Connor's face went white with shock and humiliation. This wasn't possible. Yellow belts didn't score against black belts, especially not with such clinical precision. Connor reset, his casual arrogance replaced by desperate aggression. He launched another attack, throwing wild combinations fueled by panic and embarrassment. Michael absorbed the initial strikes on his guard, then countered with surgical precision. A hook to the body followed by an uppercut that snapped Connor's head back. The black belt stumbled backward, his nose bleeding, his eyes wide with shock and growing rage. Point, Thompson. Match, Thompson. Connor stood frozen in the center of the ring, his face cycling through disbelief, humiliation, and burning fury. His mouth opened and closed wordlessly as the reality of his defeat sank in. When the referee raised Michael's hand in victory, Connor's composure finally cracked. "This is impossible," he shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. "He's a yellow belt. This doesn't make sense." Meanwhile, Marcus was called to Ring 2 for his match against Jake Harrison. The older boy's confidence had evaporated watching his friend's humiliation, replaced by barely controlled panic. "This won't happen to me," Jake hissed as they faced off, his voice shaking with desperation. "I've been doing this since I was 8 years old." "Good for you," Marcus replied calmly. The match began with Jake employing frantic aggression, throwing everything he had learned in years of training. But Marcus had learned patience during those weeks of systematic abuse, and he waited for his moment. When Jake committed to a high kick, Marcus ducked under and drove an elbow into his opponent's exposed ribs. The impact was audible throughout the gymnasium, and Jake's scream of pain carried clearly to the shocked spectators. Before Jake could recover, Marcus grabbed his off-balance opponent and threw him with a hip toss that sent the black belt crashing to the mat with bone-jarring force. "Point, Thompson!" Jake struggled to his feet, tears of rage and humiliation streaming down his face. The crowd was openly buzzing now, parents and competitors trying to process what they were witnessing. The second exchange was brief and devastating. Jake came forward with wild, desperate strikes. Marcus countered with surgical precision, a straight punch to the throat, followed by a sweep that sent Jake tumbling. "Point, Thompson! Match, Thompson!" Jake lay on the mat for several seconds, his body shaking with sobs of pure humiliation. When he finally stood, his face was a mask of hatred and wounded pride. The gymnasium erupted in confused chatter as both Thompson twins stood victorious. The Warriors Path dojo section exploded into chaos. "This is fraud!" Richard Harrison shouted, storming toward the tournament officials. "Those boys aren't yellow belts, they're sandbaggers." Bill Mills was right behind him, his face purple with rage. "They've been hiding their real skill level. This is cheating." Sensei Mitchell joined the angry parents, his voice shaking with desperation. "There's been some kind of mistake. These boys couldn't even defend themselves 2 months ago. Someone's been coaching them illegally." "They're ringers," Richard continued, jabbing his finger toward the twins. "Professional fighters pretending to be beginners. I demand an investigation." The tournament director, a patient man in his 60s, tried to calm the situation. "Gentlemen, I've seen the boys' registration. They're legitimately ranked yellow belts from your own dojo." "Then they lied about their experience," Bill Mills snarled. "No yellow belt fights like that. It's impossible." Meanwhile, Jake and Connor stood together near their dojo's seating area, their humiliation complete and public. Both teenagers were fighting back tears of rage, their carefully constructed image of superiority shattered in front of everyone they knew. "This isn't over," Jake whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. "They made us look like fools, in front of everyone." "They cheated somehow," Connor replied, his hands clenched into fists. "Yellow belts don't fight like that. It's not possible." David Thompson approached the agitated parents and officials, his expression dangerously calm. "Is there a problem here?" "Your sons are frauds," Richard Harrison accused, pointing at the twins. "They're not yellow belts. This whole thing is a setup." "They earned their yellow belts at your dojo," David replied evenly. 2 months ago, in front of your instructor." "Then someone's been training them illegally," Bill Mills shouted. "No beginner develops skills like that." "Maybe your sons just aren't as good as you thought they were," David said, his voice carrying quiet menace. The accusation hit like a physical blow. Both fathers recoiled, their faces flushing with renewed anger at the suggestion that their sons, their perfect, superior sons, had been legitimately defeated by kids they considered inferior. "We know what we saw," Richard snarled. "Those boys humiliated Jake and Connor on purpose, made them look weak and stupid." "Maybe because Jake and Connor are weak and stupid," Marcus said quietly, appearing beside his father. The words struck like lightning. Jake Harrison let out a strangled cry of rage and started toward Marcus, but tournament security quickly intervened. "That's enough," the tournament director announced. "The matches were fair and legitimate. The results stand." As the twins collected their victory certificates and prepared to leave, the atmosphere remained charged with dangerous emotion. The systematic humiliation of Jake Harrison and Connor Mills had created enemies who would not forgive or forget. The Thompson family was walking toward the exit when Jake and Connor broke away from their parents and approached from behind. Their faces were streaked with tears of rage and humiliation, their movements desperate and uncontrolled. "Hey!" Jake called out, his voice cracking with emotion. Marcus and Michael turned around, still riding the high of their victories. They saw two defeated bullies approaching, but failed to recognize the dangerous desperation in their eyes. "You think you're so smart," Connor snarled, closing the distance. "Think you proved something today?" "We proved we're better than you," Marcus replied, his confidence making him careless. It was exactly what Jake and Connor needed to hear. Their humiliation reached a breaking point, and all pretense of sportsmanship evaporated. Connor threw a wild punch at Michael's head, while Jake lunged at Marcus with a vicious tackle. Both twins went down hard, caught completely off guard by the cheap shots. The crowd erupted in shocked screams as Jake and Connor began raining down punches on the fallen boys, their months of frustrated anger finally exploding into violence. The cheap shots had caught the twins completely off guard, but their father's training kicked in within seconds. Marcus rolled away from Jake's wild punches and came up in a fighting stance, while Michael absorbed Connor's initial strikes and countered with a devastating uppercut that sent the black belt staggering backward. "You want a real fight?" Marcus snarled, his tournament composure replaced by raw fury. "Let's go!" What followed was nothing like the controlled sparring they'd just won. This was street fighting, brutal and unforgiving, with months of suppressed rage finally exploding into violence. Marcus caught Jake with a combination that split his lip and bloodied his nose, while Michael systematically dismantled Connor with the kind of precise strikes their father had drilled into them during those secret training sessions. "Stop! Stop!" the tournament director shouted, but his voice was lost in the chaos as spectators scrambled away from the expanding brawl. Jake tried to tackle Marcus again, but the twin sidestepped and drove a knee into his opponent's ribs that folded him in half. Connor managed to land a wild haymaker on Michael's shoulder, but the counterpunch that followed sent him crashing into a folding chair. Security guards finally reached the melee, grabbing all four fighters and forcibly separating them. Jake and Connor were both bloodied and battered, their black belts torn and stained with their own blood. The twins, while breathing hard, showed significantly less damage despite being jumped from behind. "What happened here?" the tournament director demanded, his face red with anger and embarrassment. "They attacked us from behind," Michael said, wiping blood from a split lip. "We were walking away." "That's not what happened," Jake protested, his voice thick from his broken nose. "They started it. They've been provoking us all day." "By beating you fair and square?" Marcus shot back. David Thompson pushed through the crowd, his face a mask of controlled fury, as he assessed his son's condition. Both boys were upright and alert, but the fact that they'd been jumped after legitimately winning their matches sent his protective instincts into overdrive. "Are you boys all right?" he asked, his hands checking for serious injuries. "We're fine, Dad," Marcus replied. "Better than them." Richard Harrison and Bill Mills arrived at the same time, their faces cycling between concern for their sons and rage at the situation. Both Jake and Connor looked like they'd been through a meat grinder, their martial arts pride ground into dust, along with their physical dignity. "This is assault," Richard shouted, pointing at the twins. "Those boys attacked my son." "After your son jumped them from behind," David replied, his voice dangerously quiet. In front of 200 witnesses. The tournament director consulted with his security team and several officials who had witnessed the incident. The conversation was brief and decisive. "Jake Harrison and Connor Mills are disqualified from this tournament and banned from all future regional competitions," he announced. "Attacking opponents after legitimate matches is completely unacceptable." "What about them?" Bill Mills demanded, gesturing at the twins. "They fought back. They defended themselves against an unprovoked attack. That's not only legal, it's expected." The decision sent shockwaves through the Warriors Path Dojo contingent. Their star students weren't just defeated. They were disgraced, banned, and humiliated in front of the entire martial arts community. "This is outrageous," Sensei Mitchell protested. "There must be some mistake." "The only mistake was allowing those boys to represent your school," the tournament director replied coldly. "Perhaps you should reconsider your training methods." As EMTs checked the injured fighters, the scope of the damage became clear. Jake had a broken nose, split lip, and what appeared to be bruised ribs. Connor sported a black eye, multiple facial lacerations, and was favoring his left arm. Both would need medical attention. The twins, by contrast, had suffered minor injuries despite being jumped from behind. Their father's training had not only prepared them to win fair fights, but to survive and dominate unfair ones. "We should press charges," Richard Harrison said to his wife, who had arrived with the other parents. "This was clearly premeditated assault." "Against kids who were walking away when your son attacked them?" David interjected. "Good luck with that." The Harrison and Mills families huddled together, their voices rising as they tried to process the complete collapse of their children's martial arts careers. The bans would follow Jake and Connor throughout their remaining teenage years, effectively ending any competitive aspirations they might have harbored. "This isn't over," Richard Harrison said directly to David as the families began to separate. "Not by a long shot." "It is for your boys," David replied. "They made their choice when they jumped mine from behind." As the Thompson family gathered their things and prepared to leave, the gymnasium buzzed with excited conversation about the dramatic turn of events. The story would spread throughout the local martial arts community within hours, how two yellow belts had not only defeated established black belts in fair competition, but had dominated them in the street fight that followed. "Dad, they looked really angry when we left," Michael observed as they walked to the parking lot. "People don't like having their illusions shattered," David replied, "especially when those illusions involve their children's superiority." "What do you think they'll do?" Marcus asked. David was quiet for a moment, his military instincts analyzing potential threats and responses. Probably nothing smart. Angry people rarely make good decisions. The drive home should have been celebratory. The twins had achieved complete vindication, proving their worth in both legitimate competition and street combat. But something about the Harrison and Mills families' parting words suggested this victory had come at a cost they hadn't yet calculated. At home, the twins cleaned their minor injuries, while David made sure all doors were locked and the security system was armed. Call it paranoia or experience, but something told him the confrontation at the tournament was just the beginning. Meanwhile, across town, 2 carloads of angry parents and humiliated teenagers were having a very different conversation about the day's events. The Harrison and Mills families had spent years believing in their son's superiority, their dojo's excellence, and their own social position. All of that had been shattered in one afternoon by 2 kids they dismissed as inferior. The rational response would be to accept defeat and move on. But rational responses required rational people, and the families gathered in the Harrison living room were far from rational. "We can't let this stand," Richard Harrison said, pacing his expensively furnished living room. "Our boys were humiliated, banned, destroyed in front of everyone we know." "It's not fair," Connor mumbled through his swollen lips. "They cheated somehow. Yellow belts don't fight like that." "Exactly," Bill Mills agreed. "There's something wrong with this whole situation. Something that needs to be corrected." As the evening wore on, their anger crystallized into something more dangerous than disappointment. It became a plan that involved following the Thompson family home and having a more private conversation about respect and consequences. By 10 o'clock that night, 2 cars were parked at the end of the Thompson street, their occupants watching the house and planning their next move. The Thompson house sat quietly in the suburban darkness, its windows glowing with warm light that spoke of family dinners and homework sessions. David had just finished checking the locks one final time when the doorbell rang at 10:47 p.m. "Who could that be at this hour?" Lisa Thompson asked from the kitchen, where she was finishing the dishes. David peered through the front window and saw 2 men standing on his porch under the outdoor light. Richard Harrison and Bill Mills, both still wearing the clothes they'd worn to the tournament, both radiating barely controlled aggression. "Stay inside," David told his wife, his voice carrying the calm authority that had served him well in the military. "Take the boys to their room." "What's wrong?" Lisa asked, immediately sensing the tension in her husband's posture. "Nothing I can't handle. Just do what I said." The doorbell rang again, more insistently this time, followed by heavy knocking that echoed through the house. David opened the door, but left the security chain engaged, creating a 4-inch gap through which he could see his unexpected visitors. "Evening, gentlemen. Little late for a social call, isn't it?" "We need to talk," Richard Harrison said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "About what happened today, and what your boys did to ours. Your boys attacked mine from behind after losing fair fights." "What's to discuss?" "Open the door, Thompson," Bill Mills demanded, stepping closer to the entrance. "We're not having this conversation through a crack. Actually, we're not having this conversation at all. It's nearly 11 o'clock. You're on my property uninvited, and you're clearly agitated. Time to leave." David started to close the door, but Richard Harrison shoved his shoulder against it, preventing it from shutting completely. "Do you have any idea how much money we've invested in our boys' training?" Richard snarled through the gap. 7 years of lessons, tournament fees, equipment, camps, thousands of dollars, and your boys destroyed it all in one afternoon. Your money bought you nothing but entitled bullies. That's not my problem. Jake was being recruited by college programs, Bill Mills interjected, his voice rising with desperation. Full scholarships were being discussed. Now he's banned from competition until he's 18. Maybe he should have thought about that before jumping my son from behind. "Your boys are the ones who should be banned," Richard shouted. "They're frauds, sandbaggers. Yellow belts don't fight like that. My boys earned their victories fair and square. Your boys earned their bans by being poor sports and worse fighters." The men on the porch exchanged glances, their frustration building as David refused to be intimidated or drawn into their preferred confrontation. "We want compensation," Bill Mills said suddenly. "Financial compensation for what your boys cost our families." David's laugh was harsh and humorless. "Compensation? For what? Teaching your kids that bullying has consequences? For destroying years of investment? For ruining their futures? Their futures were ruined the moment they decided to target my boys. I just helped speed up the process." "Open this door," Richard demanded, his patience finally exhausted. "We're going to settle this properly." "We are settling it properly." "Properly means you leave my property before I call the police." "Call them," Bill Mills shouted. "We'll tell them about your boys' illegal training. about how you turned them into weapons. Go ahead. I'll tell them about months of racial harassment your boys inflicted on mine. See which story they find more compelling. David unhooked the security chain and stepped out onto the porch, closing the door behind him. The two fathers immediately spread out, flanking him in what they clearly thought was an intimidating formation. "You think you're tough because you were in the army?" Richard sneered. "Think that makes you better than us?" "I don't think anything. I know I raised better sons than you did." "Our sons are champions," Bill Mills protested. "They worked for years to earn their rank. Your sons are bullies who couldn't handle losing to kids they thought were beneath them. All that training, all that money, and they still got beaten by yellow belts." The words hit like physical blows. Both men's faces flushed with renewed rage as the full scope of their humiliation sank in. "You ruined them," Richard said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Years of work, gone. College opportunities, gone. All because you couldn't teach your boys to know their place." "Their place?" David's voice carried deadly quiet. "And where exactly is that?" "You know damn well where," Bill Mills said, stepping closer. The racial undertone was finally out in the open, ugly and unmistakable. David's military training kicked in as he assessed the tactical situation. Two civilians, clearly emotional, obviously inexperienced in real combat. "Last chance to walk away," David said calmly. "We're not walking anywhere," Richard replied, throwing the first punch. David sidestepped the wild swing easily and countered with a precise strike to Richard's solar plexus that dropped him gasping to his knees. Bill Mills rushed forward, swinging wildly, but David caught his wrist and used the man's momentum to throw him hard against the porch railing. "Stay down," David commanded, but both men struggled to their feet, their pride overriding their pain. What followed was a brief, one-sided demonstration of the difference between real combat training and suburban anger. Richard managed to land one glancing blow on David's shoulder before taking a combination that bloodied his nose and split his lip. Bill Mills fared worse, ending up face down on the porch with David's knee in his back. "Had enough?" David asked, breathing heavily but clearly in control. Both men were too battered and exhausted to continue fighting, but their hatred burned undiminished. "This isn't over," Richard gasped, blood streaming from his nose. "Yes, it is," David replied, releasing Bill Mills and stepping back. "Your boys are banned, your money's wasted, and now you know what happens when you bring this to my door." The sound of approaching sirens cut through the night air as police cars turned onto Maple Street, their red and blue lights painting the suburban houses in alternating colors. The police cars pulled up to the Thompson house with lights flashing, casting red and blue shadows across the suburban street. Officer Martinez stepped out of the lead vehicle, her hand resting casually on her service weapon as she assessed the scene. Two bloodied men sitting on a porch, one standing calmly with his hands visible. "Someone called about a disturbance," she said, approaching the group with professional caution. "That was me," David replied, his voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through his system. "These men came to my property making threats after 11 p.m. When I asked them to leave, they attacked me." "That's not what happened," Richard Harrison protested, struggling to his feet while holding a tissue to his bleeding nose. "He assaulted us. We came here to talk and he jumped us." Officer Martinez looked at the scene with experienced eyes. David Thompson stood relaxed, but alert, showing minimal signs of physical confrontation. The two other men were clearly worse for wear, with injuries consistent with being on the losing end of a fight. "Sir, what's your name?" she asked David. "David Thompson. This is my house, my property. These men are Richard Harrison and Bill Mills. They showed up uninvited, refused to leave when asked, and became physically aggressive. We have every right to seek answers," Bill Mills interjected, his voice thick with pain and anger. His boys destroyed our children's futures today. Years of training, thousands of dollars, all wasted because of what they did. What exactly did they do? Officer Martinez asked, pulling out her notepad. They attacked our sons at a martial arts tournament, Richard said. Beat them up in front of hundreds of people. David's laugh was humorless. My sons won legitimate matches against their boys in fair competition. Then their boys jumped mine from behind afterward. Security footage will confirm everything. Officer Martinez's partner, Officer Johnson, had been speaking with neighbors who had emerged to investigate the commotion. He approached the group with additional information. Neighbors confirmed they heard shouting and saw these two men approach the house aggressively, he reported. Mrs. Patterson across the street says she saw them push against the door when the homeowner tried to close it. They were trespassing, David said calmly. I asked them to leave multiple times. When they refused and became physical, I defended myself. Defended himself? Richard's voice cracked with indignation. Look at us. Look at what he did. Officer Martinez studied both injured men, then looked at David's relatively unmarked appearance. Sir, do you have any military or law enforcement background? 8 years Army, including 2 combat deployments, David replied. The officer nodded, understanding immediately why the fight had been so one-sided. 2 angry civilians against a trained soldier was never going to end well for the civilians. Here's what's going to happen, Officer Martinez announced. Mr. Harrison, Mr. Mills, you're both going to receive citations for trespassing and disturbing the peace. Mr. Thompson, you're within your rights to defend your property and yourself, but I strongly recommend everyone cool down before this escalates further. Citations? Bill Mills sputtered. He assaulted us. You were on his property at 11 p.m. making threats after he asked you to leave. In Texas, that's called trespassing and harassment. The fact that you came out worse in the fight doesn't change who initiated the confrontation. Richard Harrison wiped blood from his nose, his face a mask of rage and humiliation. Our boys are banned from competition because of what his kids did. 7 years of training, gone. College scholarships, gone. And now we're the ones getting cited? Your boys are banned because they attacked other competitors after losing matches, Officer Martinez replied. That's a martial arts organization decision, not a legal one. Unless you want to add filing false reports to your citations? The threat hung in the air, as both men realized their night was only getting worse. They'd come seeking confrontation and validation, but found only additional humiliation and legal consequences. Meanwhile, inside the house, the twins had been watching through their bedroom window, their mother having reluctantly allowed them to witness the resolution of events they'd inadvertently set in motion. Dad's okay, Marcus whispered, relief evident in his voice as they watched their father speaking calmly with the police. More than okay, Michael replied, noting the battered condition of their former tormentors' fathers. Looks like those guys learned the same lesson their sons did. Lisa Thompson stood in the doorway, her nurse's training warring with her protective instincts as she watched her husband handle the aftermath of violence with military precision. Your father's always been good at taking care of problems, she said quietly. Outside, the police were finishing their paperwork and preparing to clear the scene. The 2 injured fathers sat in the back of separate patrol cars, their citations being processed while they received basic medical attention for their injuries. Mr. Thompson, Officer Martinez said, approaching David as the situation wound down. You handled yourself well tonight, but I'd recommend installing security cameras and maybe varying your family's routine for a while. People like this sometimes hold grudges. Already planned on it, David replied. Thank you for responding so quickly. Just doing our job. And Mr. Thompson? Your boys did good today. Sometimes bullies need to learn that actions have consequences. As the police cars pulled away, taking Richard Harrison and Bill Mills to face booking and citations, David stood on his porch surveying the quiet suburban street. The confrontation he'd been expecting since the tournament was over resolved decisively in favor of his family. The twins emerged from the house, their faces mixing relief with residual adrenaline from the night's events. "Is it over, Dad?" Michael asked. David looked at his sons, both stronger, more confident, and more capable than they'd been just months ago. They'd faced systematic bullying, overcome institutional indifference, and emerged victorious against opponents who'd considered them inferior. "It's over," he said firmly. "They know now that you boys aren't victims, that our family isn't going to be pushed around. And most importantly, they know that actions have consequences." Marcus nodded, understanding the deeper lesson their father was teaching. "We don't start fights, but we finish them." "Exactly. But we also don't go looking for trouble. Tonight was about them bringing trouble to us." "That's different." As they headed inside, David took one last look at his quiet neighborhood. Tomorrow there would be paperwork to file, security systems to install, and probably difficult conversations with school administrators and tournament officials. But tonight, his family was safe. His sons had learned the value of standing up for themselves, and two bullying fathers had discovered that their children weren't the only ones who could face consequences for their actions. The lesson was complete, the victory total, and the transformation of the Thompson twins from victims to victors absolutely final. 6 weeks after the tournament, the Warriors Path dojo sat empty except for Sensei Robert Mitchell, who was packing equipment into cardboard boxes with the methodical resignation of a man watching his life's work crumble around him. The investigation had been swift and thorough. The Regional Martial Arts Association had interviewed students, parents, and tournament witnesses, creating a damning picture of systematic harassment enabled by an instructor who prioritized donor money over student safety. Mitchell's teaching certification had been revoked, and the dojo's charter with the national organization permanently suspended. 30 families canceled their memberships in 2 weeks, Mitchell muttered to himself, as he wrapped his black belt collection in tissue paper. 15 years of building this place. Gone. The financial reality had been brutal. Without the Harrison and Mills families' substantial monthly contributions, and with parents pulling their children en masse after learning about the harassment scandal, the dojo couldn't meet its lease payments. The landlord had been sympathetic but firm. Businesses that generated negative publicity weren't welcome in his shopping center. Meanwhile, across town at the newly opened Integrity Martial Arts Academy, the Thompson twins were demonstrating techniques to a group of younger students. The new dojo, run by a former Marine named Master Chen, had attracted many of the families who'd fled Warriors Path after the scandal broke. "Remember, martial arts is about protecting yourself and others," Marcus explained to an 8-year-old white belt who was struggling with a basic block. "It's never about hurting people who can't defend themselves." "That's right," Master Chen added, watching the twins work with their students. "These young men understand what real martial arts means. Strength used to protect, not to bully." The twins had advanced rapidly under Master Chen's guidance, earning their orange belts within a month of joining the new school. More importantly, they'd found their place as respected senior students who helped newer members adapt to training without fear of harassment. "I heard Jake Harrison is working at his dad's insurance office now," Michael mentioned during a break between classes. "Connor Mills is doing online school instead of going back to Millbrook High." "Good," Marcus replied without malice. "Maybe they'll learn something useful." The ripple effects of the tournament had extended far beyond the martial arts community. Richard Harrison's insurance business had lost several clients after word spread about his late-night confrontation at the Thompson house. Bill Mills had been passed over for a promotion at his law firm. his professional reputation tarnished by the police citations and associated publicity. At Millbrook High School, the story had become legend. The Thompson twins, once seen as quiet newcomers, were now known as the brothers who'd taken down the town's martial arts bullies and exposed corruption at the most established dojo in the area. "It's weird being famous for fighting," Michael confided to his brother as they walked home from the new dojo. "People keep asking us to tell the story." "Better than being famous for getting beaten up," Marcus replied with a grin. At home, David Thompson was installing the last of the security cameras around their property, a precaution that had proven unnecessary as the Harrison and Mills families had retreated into embarrassed isolation following their legal difficulties. "How was class?" he asked as the twins entered through the garage. "Good. Master Chen says we might be ready for greenbelts by Christmas," Michael reported. "More importantly, we helped 3 new kids with their techniques today," Marcus added. "Nobody gets picked on at our new school." David nodded with satisfaction. The transformation was complete. His sons had gone from victims to protectors, using their hard-won skills to ensure other children wouldn't face the systematic harassment they'd endured. Lisa Thompson emerged from the kitchen, her expression mixing pride with lingering concern for her family's safety. "Any word on when the dojo officially closes?" "End of the month," David replied. "Mitchell's been trying to sell his equipment, but most schools won't touch anything associated with his program." "What about Jake and Connor? Have they found other places to train?" "Doesn't matter," Marcus said firmly. "They're banned from competition until they're 18 anyway. And even then, their reputations will follow them." The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the front door, a sound that still triggered cautious awareness in the Thompson household. But this visitor was expected and welcome. Master Chen stood on the porch holding a manila envelope and wearing the kind of smile that suggested good news. "I wanted to deliver these personally," he said, handing the envelope to David. "Official certificates for Marcus and Michael's Orange Belt promotions, plus something extra." Inside the envelope were the belt certificates, along with letters of recommendation for a youth leadership program run by the State Martial Arts Association. "They want the boys to help train instructors in anti-bullying techniques," Master Chen explained. "Apparently, their story has gotten attention at the state level. Other schools want to learn how to prevent what happened at Warrior's Path." The twins exchanged glances, their silent communication as strong as ever. After months of being targets, they were being asked to help protect others from similar experiences. "We'd be honored," Michael said, speaking for both of them. As Master Chen left and the family settled into their evening routine, the transformation that had begun in a garage with a heavy bag and focus mitts reached its natural conclusion. The Thompson twins hadn't just learned to defend themselves, they'd become leaders, examples of how victims could become protectors through determination and proper training. "You boys proud of what you've accomplished?" David asked, as they sat around the dinner table. "Proud we didn't quit," Marcus replied. "Proud we proved we belonged wherever we choose to be," Michael added. "And proud we can help other kids avoid what we went through," they said together, their twin synchronization intact despite all the changes in their lives. Outside, Millbrook continued its quiet suburban existence, but the power dynamics that had once seemed fixed and permanent had been completely rewritten. The bullies had been exposed and defeated, the corrupt instructor had lost everything, and 2 young men who'd once been considered easy targets were now respected leaders in their community. Sometimes justice came slowly, through courts and committees and official procedures, but sometimes it came swiftly, delivered by those who refused to accept that strength belonged only to those who abused it. The Thompson twins had learned both lessons well, and they would carry them forward for the rest of their lives. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please like the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.